difference between using and receiving from literature or poetry. And he talks about those people who are literary and those who are unliterary. He makes a complete distinction between people who are able to learn from what they're reading without being told. And also, he makes the jump that teachers should not beat a piece of literature, a passage, a poem to death, and think that they're actually teaching the students. Instead, if we receive poetry, that means we are able to experience it ourselves. So with that, I hope that what I've chosen is a poem you don't know. You might know this one, maybe not. And maybe it was a brave choice to go with free verse rather than something lyrical and rhythmic with a beautiful cadence. But I wanted to use something that I likely would use with one of my high school classes. So with that, let's begin class. So I normally begin class with a greeting, and then you respond back. So I would say, good morning, class, and you say, good morning, Mrs. Norvell. So let's just join in the experiment. Are you guys game for this? All right. Good morning, class.
Good morning, Mrs. Norvell.
I'd like to read a poem to you. If you would follow along, please do not write on your sheet of paper. In fact, if you're holding your pen or pencil, would you set it down? Or sit on your hands? No. We do that too if we're getting fidgety, right? Let me read the poem, and then I'm going to have you read it quietly a second time, or probably it will be the third time because many of you already looked through it before we even began. A mouthful of language to swallow, stretches of beach, sweet clenches, breaches and walls, pleached branches, breeches hauled over haunches, bunched leeches, wrenched teachers. What English can do, ransack the warmth that chuckles beneath fuzzed surfaces, smooth velvet richness, plashy juices. I beseech you, peach, clench me into the sweetness of your reaches. So I'd like you to read it a second time, silently, to yourself, no pen or pencil, no writing aloud. Just read it again. Read it a second time if you're a fast reader, and then we'll talk about what you've noted, observed, and what you enjoy about it. All right, you may have read it through once or twice, maybe 3 times more if you're quick. Several of you are itching. Your fingers are like moving, like you're like, I want to mark on my paper. So let's talk about what you would mark without even thinking of poetic terms or literary terminology. And this is a great practice because Dr. Clark this morning already did exactly what I do when I teach poetry, and that is, what did you notice? What stands out? You took a breath like you were going to say a word. Oh, go ahead. Come on. First impressions.
Separated into 2 different, 6 lines. After the word ransack, it kind of goes into describing how the peach tastes. But
Yes.
I feel like the first 6 are describing what the how language would interact with it. Maybe.
Okay. Good point. What else do we notice? Nothing is too simple. There's nothing too basic. There's nothing too profound.
The structure is different in the first 6 lines as opposed to the second 6 lines. But in the first 6 lines, you have stretches, clenches, breeches, branches, breeches, haunches. So you have repeated consonant sounds in the
Yes.
first 6 lines, and that same repetition is not found in the second 6.
This is true. So, by way of review, and that's normally when I speak to my classes, if they think of a term that they do know and they remember it and use it accurately or inaccurately, we'll go ahead and talk about it. Consonants. Yes. What else? All the ch sounds. Has a very unusual effect. How would you describe the effect it has when you read that?
I think the effect is, well, it's kind of a joke with the first line, a mouthful of language to swallow, and then what he does is he gives us all these ch's and then switches the vowel sounds kind of back and forth
Yes.
throughout. So when you first read it, you kind of have to read it slowly because it is actually a mouthful because you're repeating some sounds and then switching vowel sounds kind of back and forth. So it's almost like a tongue twister.
Yes.
Not quite. Like it flows well, but he's kind of showing all the different like kind of aspects of the sound of the English language.
But you're right, your mouth is full. You can't read this quickly. I read it pretty slowly to you, and if you read it out loud right now, you have to slow down because of all the ch. It just takes a lot to say those. What else do you see? What else do you hear?
Well, that first part is very difficult, but that second 6 is a little more smooth. And it's like language, the difficulty of language versus the beautiful and flowing easiness of language, and they're juxtaposed between that first 6 lines and that second 6 lines.
So are the first 6 lines doing the ransacking to the warmth that chuckles beneath both services? Ransack is a pretty powerful word.
It is sort of like minted this morning. There's a lot in the connotation, and I really think Dr. Clark was talking about that, how the most precise word can give the feel and the intelligence and the exact intent of the poet or the author. It really relates that. So we're going to leave that question open-ended, unless, Jenny, you would like to answer that. You can keep talking about it. Just speak out loud, think out loud. Is the first part what English can do? Ransacking the language.
I have to ask the question, what is the warmth that chuckles beneath both services before I can decide whether those lines are ransacking it or not?
We'll keep that out there because we'll keep thinking about it. How about in the last half, the last 6 lines? Ransack the warmth that chuckles beneath fuzzed surfaces, smooth velvet richness, plashy juices.
I think there's something about those that's almost like onomatopoeic. It's like it's not quite, but especially the fuzzed surfaces, the sounds that you're making is almost fuzzy, I guess, which is sort of a weird way to say it, maybe. But the smooth velvet richness, a lot of very like smooth, soft sounds throughout that phrase, and then when you get hit with plashy juices.
Yes. Now you're going to test me, though, because now I have to spell onomatopoeia. Let's see if we can do it together then. Onomato. Is it poia? Does that look right-ish? Mostly?
Yeah.
It's true. So the consonants also has the effect upon us of a sound that sounds like the word itself. It does? Yes.
This poem kind of seems like a poem about poetry a little bit, in that the first part is poetry, and then the second part explains that we can do that with English, and that we can capture the essence of the inside of a juicy peach with words a little bit.
Under the surface of the skin of the peach, which is answering the question that Jenny had already posed.
Well, the structure of the first 6 lines reminds me of Beowulf
Oh,
and the breaking out of the two parts in the Beowulf when you read it.
yes.
The 2 pieces in each line. And the second part reminds me of more of a smooth flowing, more cosmopolitan or contemporary English writing style,
Mhm.
as opposed to like an old English sort of writing style in the first part.
Right. So he begins with maybe the difficulty of the language and how we pair things, and then the second half smooths it out to get to his meaning. Would that be fair? Now, what's interesting is most students really just want to get to the meaning. They just want to, what does the poem mean? Tell me what it means. And I'm like, no. That's not why we're reading the poetry. It's not to get to the point or to assume that I know the point or that you know the point. It's to experience the poem. So let's go to the first 5 lines or so and look at the pairs of words that Davison has put together for us. And see if you can understand what each pair means, because I think there might be a little bit more. They're not just examples, they are that, but I think there might be another layer beneath that. So, stretches of beach, sweet clinches, breaches in walls, pleached branches. Why those phrases? Are they only samples of English language? Is there anything else to it? Do we think there has to be something else to it?
What does the word bleached mean?
Anybody know what pleached is? I know what bleached is. Pleached?
Like you took the peaches off the branch and so now they're bleached.
That makes really good sense, but
I think it's like bringing something
It says
together.
denoting or consisting of branches that are entwined or interlaced to form a hedge to provide cover for an outdoor walkway.
Wow.
Okay, like arbor work. You know, training the fruit trees along the esplanade. Is that the right word?
To me, it sounds very romantic. Stretches of beaches and sweet clinches are like romantic walks along the beach.
Oh my! Yes.
And it can happen, you know, on the other side of the garden wall where there's a breach and the branches are interlaced and the lovers are kissing.
So if you mention that, we should go to line.
This might just be me.
Well, then go to the 4th line.
Read Shakespeare?
Uh-oh.
Breeches hauled over haunches. Now, if I held up a peach in class right now, there are always jokes about what peaches resemble. Haunches might be a polite word for it, right?
Maybe I was more right than I thought.
I wonder if how he's putting things together, there might be just a little theme. It doesn't have to mean a lot. It can simply just be there for fun because he's playing with the language, right? We do understand that Davison is playing with the language. But I find it's just funny to me. Breeches hauled over haunches. I'm like, wait, is that the peach or the people? What are we talking about? But then you have that 5th line, which is troublesome. Because look, our connotation now is quite different. Bunched, leeches, wrenched, teachers. It sounds very unpleasant. Who are the leeches? What are the leeches? Do we have leeches with peaches? How does that work? I don't think there's leeches that come with peaches. Most fruit trees have worms in the fruit that can be laid there by a moth or something else, or a beetle. Leeches on peaches?
It seems like it's a lot of juxtaposition of ideas. So breaches and walls is like an opening in a wall.
Right.
Whereas pleached branches is interweaving, bringing
Right.
branches together.
Right?
Bunched leeches, so, well, we can say this in this teacher room. Leeches are something that take, teachers are something that give. So we have a...
Oh, we do have a few students in here.
Oh.
But
I'm
I
not
think
saying that
it's
students are
okay.
leeches. I'm saying Leeches.
Seniors, they're almost out. It's okay.
Leeches, not students. But leeches take, right? And teachers give. And the idea of bunched leeches being leeches coming together and wrenched teachers being teachers kind of wrenched apart.
Bunched leeches, wrenched teachers. And then he talks about the English language. What English can do. Yes?
Does it have to do with the agricultural approach of when you talk about a teacher branch?
Oh, I
There's
haven't
a
even
lot
thought of that.
With a lot of fruit trees, when you're trying to increase the production on the fruit tree,
yes.
what you will do with some of the lower bearing branches is that you'll tape them or ribbon them to what they call a teacher branch.
Okay.
And
And training
what
it.
that does is it guides that limb in the direction on the tree so that it can bear more fruit.
And they're the leeches. The other branch would be the leech to the teacher.
Like the suckers. In gardening, you often talk about sucker branches or on a tomato. You have to pinch things off so that you can fruit better and bigger. I hadn't even thought of that. And that's what I like about classwork, is that all of our minds are experiencing it and pulling in different contexts like that. But he comes back to, what English can do, ransack. So let's talk about the connotation of ransack. What are the things you think of when you think of ransack?
It's more to the breach, brother.
Back to the military, the breach. You ransack a house, you ransack a pirates ransack, Vikings ransack.
That chaotic gathering, searching out.
Right.
Yeah, I was thinking about it maybe in the negative, like you ransack your house looking for your car keys or that $100 you know you have but you can't find it, or
100, yes.
Yeah. But if you use ransack in that terminology, you're ransacking language. You're looking for the right word, just the right word to say, just the right term or metaphor to use.
So that's a positive spin.
Yeah.
Ransack is typically negative, but if I'm searching and hunting for the precise word I want, then it comes back to what he's doing, what English can do. What can it do? It's like the potential to ransack. And then those final lines are about, look what is right under the surface of the skin of the peach. And that's where the lines smooth out as if he's illustrating what you've just mentioned. It's like, I found the words. Here, this is what you should know. The warmth that chuckles beneath fuzzed surfaces. But if you see, ransack doesn't have a piece of punctuation after it. So let's just follow the punctuation cues. What English can do, colon. And we know this mid-sentence. If I see a colon, I usually have a list to follow, right? Ransack the warmth that chuckles beneath fuzzed surfaces. Smooth velvet richness, plashy juices. There's my list. Yes.
Another, for the colon, could it also be like bringing attention to the following? Like, not
Yes.
just a list, but like bring attention to the word ransack.
Yes.
Or the following.
Yes. Because the colon makes you stop for just that moment. And he kept ransack on the same line by itself. That's a great point, Elijah. That's exactly why we see it so well. There it is, by itself. How about the last sentence? I beseech you, peach, clinch me into the sweetness of your reaches.
It's asking for the right word. Bring me to the,
To the place where I can choose the right word. It's almost like Milton asking the muse to guide him to say the right words.
I beseech you, peach. I hold you up and ask you, inspire me, divine peach. Yes. It is. Doesn't it have that little flair?
Does that mean it's an ode?
Is it an ode to a peach? Is it a praise of a peach? Does that mean we're ready to go to the meaning? Do we think we've really sucked everything out of the Peaches poem? Is it an ode to a peach? No. What is it then? How do we put it into words? What is Davison actually trying to tell us? Or consider. Maybe that's a better thing. Does there have to be one exact and precise meaning to the poem? No. No, I think we restrict our students if we do that, because then you're saying there's always a right answer, which means there's lots of wrongs. And that's unfair to the poet and the poem.
Because title's a metaphor for language. Like
Oh.
the peach is, words are peaches.
Words are peaches. I see a lot of head nods. But can we add to that? Is there anything else?
A couple of more C words for your board. Comparison and contrast. You already mentioned that, I think.
A little bit.
But when you have a metaphor, you say A is B, language is a peach. That causes you to think, well, how is it like a peach, and how is it not like a peach?
It's true. Actually, we have a lot of C words.
And the term for the division in the lines, like with Beowulf, is Kaisura.
Yes.
I was just
Oh, you want, oh. Sorry. Oh, R-A? U-R-A. Sura, that's right. Yeah, division. So would all my students, if I'm teaching 8th graders, would they know all those terms? Probably not. But I would begin with what they actually know. It's almost like a show me what you know exercise. What does come to mind? Okay, so if you think of all the ch sounds, what do we know that to be called? Is there a word for that if we hear a lot of ch? So they might remember automatopoeia, which they would have had plenty of times in lower school work with fun poetry, hopefully. Automatopoeia, yes. Consonants, maybe. Maybe you can review assonants and consonants, but in general, if we're going through a poem, I don't ever want to be accused of beating it to death, because I did that for years. I beat them to death, and I'm pretty sure I sucked the life out of many poems before I learned that holding back a little bit as a teacher is actually better for the students. So I might only review 2 to 3 literary terms when we teach a single poem. Can I do a poetry unit for a full week? Absolutely. But I still won't try to overwhelm their minds, and I will always review back and fasten to what we just learned and intentionally choose poems where we're building upon and every day using. We'd start maybe with this list the next day. Are there 2 more terms I can add if I'm doing a week of poetry, which is quite a bit, but not overwhelming. Not overwhelming them to the point where they can't keep terms and application of them straight. All right, so any final thoughts on peaches? And if you don't know who Peter Davison is, he was a longtime editor of the Atlantic Monthly, maybe had 3 or 4 volumes of poetry before he died in 2004. So he is 20th century, but his poetry, some is really concrete, but most all is heavily metaphorical, like peaches, which you pick up a poem called Peaches and you think it's just about a peach. That's what which is sort of...
leads us to the last C term, which is conceit, the extended
Yes,
metaphor.
yes. Yeah, the extended metaphor, which maybe my 11th and 12th graders could remember. But I probably wouldn't teach to my 7th and 8th just yet, unless I just had some wise kid who said, hey, Mrs. Norvell, that's a... Very true. Any other thoughts? Makes you think about a peach differently, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think part of what he's saying here is that language can help us talk about the actual world around us and experiences that we have. And a peach is a particularly poignant example, maybe, but that we can say true and beautiful things about real things that we experience in the world. So when he's talking about ransacking the warmth that chuckles beneath us, or ransacking the warmth, the smoothness, and the juices of a peach, we can do this with a lot of things, but ransacking in the good sense of
Right.
going in and getting the good thing that you're looking for.
Searching and finding it.
Yeah.
Grabbing what you need.
We have a teacher that tells us that words don't mean things, but instead we use words to show what we mean. So, in a sense, this is exactly what he's doing, because if we were just going off of peaches, then we would go, this is about peaches. But instead, he's using peaches in a different sense, not to describe peaches, but to describe language and to describe poetry itself.
Precisely. That's good. So if we were to borrow from Dr. Clark's exercise this morning, could you write an epitome of paraphrase and amplification? Well, you just did by way of explanation. You're already doing it, whether you had a label on it or not. And if anything, I would encourage newer teachers to drop some of the labels that often bring confusion to students so that they can enjoy what they're reading. So let's move to my next favorite idea, and that is reading poems in pairs. Not the fruit, but the pairs. So you should have a white copy. It's 3 pages. There's some copies here in the back if you didn't get one. I actually included more than what we'd probably have time to cover today, but at least it's already something that you can use potentially in class or just get a few ideas from. John, can you grab some copies for Kyle? And because I emailed you, you have the copies.
I didn't have peaches though, so.
Oh, do you want a peach paper though?
I do, actually.
Because you know, of course, that
Peach paper.
I had to copy it on something
That's
colorful.
not about peaches.
But
It's about words.
it's about words.
Is that what I got?
Okay, so would you turn to the side that begins with an Ogden Nash poem, I Didn't Go to Church Today. I didn't go to church today. Ogden Nash is well known for fun twists and rhymes and riddles, many for children, many for adults, were full of satire and fun. And then I paired it with Emily Dickinson. Because there's a theme, which will be really obvious, and many of you probably have taught this particular Dickinson poem. Is it familiar to anyone just by the first line? You've read it or you know it, you teach it. Okay, it's one I always like to teach this one. So let's just start this way. We'll do it the same way. I'll read aloud, then we'll read quietly. Again, no pens or pencils, no marking. Let's just enjoy the poem. Ogden Nash, I didn't go to church today. I didn't go to church today. I trust the Lord to understand. The surf was swirling blue and white, the children swirling on the sand. He knows. He knows how brief my stay, how brief the spell of summer weather. He knows when I am said and done, we'll have plenty of time together. Emily Dickinson, number 236. Some keep the Sabbath going to church. I keep it staying at home with a bobolink for a chorister and an orchard for a dome. Some keep the Sabbath in surplice. I just wear my wings. And instead of tolling the bell for church, our little sexton sings. God preaches, a noted clergyman, and the sermon is never long. So instead of getting to heaven at last, I'm going all along. All right, read quietly. Go through them both again. No pencils or pens, put those down. No marking. No itchy fingers. Okay, so when I teach pairs, a theme is usually pretty easy to find as a teacher. Maybe you've read things, you can search for them as well. But there's usually a point to it, because if I have things that are slightly different or written in different eras, obviously different individuals, there's enough difference that it actually illuminates something in each other when the poems are side by side. And many times that is a way to lead students to see things without you hammering them over the head going, this is a that is a this, which I'm trying to avoid. So let's just talk about Nash first, very broadly. It's a shorter poem, obviously. Just in general, what do you enjoy about it? What do you observe? Let's hold off on, this is what it means. Although it's not obtuse. He's not trying to be vague and mysterious about his point. But what do you like about the poem? When you hear it, when you read it, what do you observe there?
I think that both the serf and the children are swirling.
Okay.
Different subjects, but that same idea.
Mm-hmm.
An emphasis on he knows God's awareness of our lives and our hearts.
Right.
He knows.
I was also thinking about that, but I was thinking about like the personal connection, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ogden Nash seems to be saying, I'm going to be spending my afterlife with God, and we're going to have lots of time to talk about stuff. Like, you know, he got a personal relationship there.
Yes.
He does the repetition of an idea with two different subjects, and then next 2 lines down from swirling too, talking about how brief his stay is and how brief summer weather
Mhm.
is.
I love that it paints the picture, kind of like you said, but more of the relationship side of faith than the religious side.
Right. Relationship over religious or an observance. Now, this might be a good time to introduce my students to tone. Tone and mood are often really difficult to distinguish. And no matter how many times I say it, it's really just something that comes with practice. So mood is always how I feel when I read the poem. So how do you feel when you read this first one by Nash? Wistful? Oh, that's a good adjective.
At ease, relaxed.
Relaxed, at ease. It's a tiny bit playful. It's a serious subject, but it's playful nonetheless. So I would continue to ask my students to throw me an adjective. Just how did it feel? How did it feel? How many times do we actually ask you that? Not too often. But then I would contrast that with tone. And the tone of the author's words are the emotion the poet has when they're choosing their words. Many times mood and tone are the same, but not always. So if I'm thinking to myself right now, Ogden Nash, when he wrote, I didn't go to church today, I trust the Lord to understand.
It almost seems like he's repenting of that. Like, I didn't go to church today, but I hope he understands. Like,
Yeah.
this is
Apologetic?
A, B, yeah. A, B,
Apologetic?
and C is why I didn't go. Like, this is why.
Right. So that's Nash's tone. Do we feel that the poem, as a reader, as an audience member, are we feeling apologetic when we're reading the poem? No. And so that would be a good example for me to point out the difference between the mood and the tone of the poet. And we already pointed out the repetition of words like swirling. He knows, he knows. Actually, he knows is in there 3 times. He already knows everything. We're okay. We understand each other. That goes to tone. That's Nash's tone and his attitude toward the subject of which he speaks.
It's interesting that both times he uses he knows, he's kind of talking about death. Because he says he knows how brief my stay, and then he knows when I am said and done.
True. But do you feel the heaviness of death
No.
or the end of life? It's more a lighthearted view of eternity. He knows when it's my time. We'll talk then. It's great. It's going to be wonderful. It's a very hopeful poem.
That's interesting because I see it as hopeful, but very with a very different mood.
Okay.
And I think that may have something to do with age or time. When I look at this, what I see is a person nearing the twilight of their life.
Hmm.
And so they know where they're going, but maybe that day they just finally felt good enough to go outside.
Okay.
And so it is hopeful, and it's very affirming of their relationship to God, but it's that also that reaching out for that part of life that is past them.
Hmm.
So there's a remembrance there.
Right.
So it's kind of bittersweet.
Okay. That probably goes to what Austin was saying about it being wistful in remembrance of what I will have, which is probably coming sooner than I want it to.
From that perspective, it reminds me a bit of Marilyn Robinson's novel Gilead.
Yes.
Sort of the man coming to the end of his life and knowing that his time is brief, it enables him to see the beauty around him so much more clearly.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like take this joy in the really simple, ordinary things of life all around him.
Right. Right.
So it's poignant.
It's poignant. I can never say that word right. Poignant. It's the G. It always throws me off in the middle. The G. Okay. So, begging the question that must be in the room. What will your students say when they read something like, I don't have to go to church? Do you think anyone would bring that up? Surely they would. How do you answer that?
I was going to say, my brothers love country music, and they told me about a song where the chorus line is, I'd rather be fishing, thinking about God, than in church, thinking about fishing. And I think that kind of is the idea.
Who's the songwriter?
I don't know.
I've heard that. I know I've heard that not too long ago. Starts with a C.
No.
Anybody admit to it? No.
Starts with
It-
this.
Oh, the name of this.
It's an Omi country song.
Okay.
I was thinking more live like you were dying, but that's okay.
Oh. Yeah. Okay, so hold that thought. We'll talk about it because students will ask. So, like, Mrs. Norvell, it's a Christian school. We're Christians. Why would we read this? Well, let's see what Dickinson will add to it. Hers is a little longer. If you haven't taught much Dickinson, she's known for her choice capitalization. And it's a great time to talk about why do we capitalize what we do in poetry? And you can compare other poems to it. She also loves the dash, which you'll see everywhere, all the time. Very few periods. Some keep the Sabbath going to church. I keep it staying at home with a bobolink, a type of bird, a small sparrow type bird, for a chorister and an orchard for a dome. She lived on a number of acres in Amherst, Massachusetts. Gorgeous gardens, gorgeous land. So she's being literal. This is a very literal poem. She literally could walk outside and wander the garden paths to keep her Sabbath. And then we have the second stanza. Some keep the Sabbath in surplice. I just wear my wings, and instead of tolling the bell for church, our little sexton sings. So normally I'd have to talk about terms for students depending on what type of church they go to. Do you know what a surplice is? Do you know that it's that white gown that's used by clergy before they speak in the front of the church? Do you know who a sexton is? Could be. They're usually a general. Yeah, they take care of the graveyards, and they're a caretaker for the church. They're like the right-hand man, the glorified janitor. But that is a term that's not used as often now. It's more European, and it's probably out of fashion in the last century or two. So I'd have to tell them what surplus is, depending on their experience. And a sexton. Some keep the Sabbath in surplus. It's a fun word to say, surplus. Sound like anything else?
Service.
Service?
Surplus, like they don't need to wear all that fancy stuff. It's extra.
Oh, wait. Wait, there might be a zinger in there then, if we go that way. Some keep the Sabbath in surplus. Are you saying Emily Dickinson because she really didn't like going to church? She was ostracized for a bit in there.
She didn't like going anywhere.
True. There came a point where that was, yes. So those who go to church, who observe the tradition and the religion, maybe that's surplus. Could she be saying that? It's potential. I think the word is carefully chosen. I just wear my wings, and instead of tolling the bell for church, our little sexton sings. How can she wear wings? What does she mean by that?
Maybe kind of a metaphor for her freedom, but also you associate the wings with angels. So there's almost like this. She wears her own worship on a daily basis. It's just something she wears all the time. It's not a special garment she only puts on for the service. And it kind of connects down later with the, instead of getting to heaven last, I'm going all along.
Yes. So the wings could imply angel wings. They could imply bird or insect if you've read her other poems. But the fact that she is worshipful day by day, not just on Sundays, that can also be seen as a point she might be making to others who don't believe as she does. God preaches a noted clergyman, and the sermon is never long. So instead of getting to heaven at last, I'm going all along. More thoughts?
Reminds me of Lewis's Weight of Glory when he says that we have things that we call nostalgia. It's really just a remembrance of an inkling of heaven that we've experienced here on earth.
Oh,
And
yes.
if we ever revisit that, if we could go back and revisit that nostalgic moment, like talk to Grandma again, even though she's passed away, or whatever our nostalgia is, it wouldn't actually be there. What we're searching for is not actually there. It's just happened to be something that presented itself to us. And so we talk through that and talk about, okay, well, what kinds of things are you experiencing with your nostalgic moments that you think back, I wish I could be there? And are those the kinds of things that we're going to experience in heaven? Was it that you felt safe? Was it that you felt known? Was it that you felt? And so we talked through that. And I love that instead of getting to heaven at last, I'm going all along. I'm getting those inklings of heaven when I'm out in my garden.
Right.
I'm getting them all along.
Right.
They're pointing me toward my destination.
That's excellent. It's the hints of heaven and the everyday. If we're looking for them, if we're open, was Lewis's point. That's good. So now if we look at them together, they're on the same page. How do we want to talk about the two poems written in very different eras? Written 100 years apart, frankly. What do you think your students would note? What do you note if you've never read these together?
Nash seems to say it's okay that I missed today because of the beautiful day, but Emily Dickinson almost shows that to her the Sabbath is every day because she chooses to see the world differently.
Okay.
For me, like Nash seems a little cheeky with his tone.
Agreed.
Dickinson seems a little cutting. You know, she's pointed in her remarks about what the Sabbath is, and he's a little more just cheeky with it.
That's true.
There's a difference between their point of view.
Yes.
Ogden is looking at himself.
True.
Dickinson is looking
She is. That's great. Ogden is looking at himself. It's written in first person as well, if we didn't have any other major clue. But then Dickinson is looking outward. She's content with where she's at, and it's like, wow, there are those. And she leaves it there. Yet it's not necessarily a negative poem. It does have that pointed feel. There is a little criticalness in it, but it's not overwhelming. It's like the compliment sandwich, you know, 2 positives and the negative in the middle. It really is. Look at it. Look at the stanzas, the quatrains.
They both are, they go against tradition because both of them are experiencing God,
Mm-hmm.
not through the traditional Sunday experience.
Yes. They do go against tradition. They do hold that similarity.
It's also very different because Nash seems temporary. Okay, just today. I'm going to do this just today and God will understand.
Yes,
And Dickinson is like, no, this is every day.
that's true.
I feel like also by saying some of the things that Dickinson says, it's kind of making the opposite point a little bit. So like some keep the Sabbath going to church, I keep it staying at home. She's actually saying that church is like home, like the Sabbath.
Yes.
And even if that's not maybe her intention, that's what it kind of speaks to me, is that church is like home. But the only way you can make that connection is if it is like that.
Is it fair to say home is church, church is home? Are they, and
They overlap.
they overlap, or they're what's the word? Not interactive. Interconnected and intertwined in that way, where there's really not this distinction. We only go to church on Sunday, and this is when we do it.
If we go back to peaches, they're bleached or pleached.
Pleached, yes.
Pleached.
Yes. Braided intentionally together.
I sort of see that a little bit differently, I guess. Like I think
Okay.
that Nash is recognizing that there is a difference between what he's doing and church,
Mm-hmm.
and what Dickinson is saying, what I'm doing I call church, as compared to those who actually go to church. You see what I mean? So it's not, she's
Is it a matter of definition,
yeah, like
where it's her definition of church?
yeah, like I think
Okay.
that she's saying this is my church, that's your church. I think she's actually saying we're not quite doing the same thing. Because I think she's trying to separate herself from those who go to church.
Yes.
She's saying, here's the thing I do, you guys do that. Whereas Nash isn't actually trying to separate himself from that. He's saying, no, normally I do that today. I took the day to enjoy the beach. But typically, and there's something about Nash's that has, when I read it, there's more of a sense of like assurance for him.
Okay.
He has, because he's saying at the end, he says he knows when I'm said and done, we'll have plenty of time together. He has this sense of assurance of the future, whereas Dickinson's ends with, so instead of getting to heaven at last, I'm going all along, which to me comes across as like I experience heaven now in this life, and Nash is saying, I know that there is something better coming, but I can enjoy this stuff now.
Okay.
See?
Yes. Yeah, it comes back to the perspective of both poets. If we had a little more time, I'd push Dickinson for a second more and say, okay, let's talk about tone and mood. How do we feel? We've gone to part of it, but I wonder if we could come up with a few list of adjectives for her tone, and the mood of the poem might be slightly different, not the same. But for the sake of time, would you turn to, we'll have to skip the pair of poems on storms, but that's something that you can definitely put in your pocket to keep. The one by Emily Bronte was written when she was younger, if you know about the Bronte sisters and their brother and creating the world of Gondal, their imaginary place. That poem was written when she was much younger, and it seems to be about storm seasons. And then Jean Toomer is 120 years later, writing 20th century, but again, about a storm. And you can use these very easily to talk about the poems themselves without really having to throw a lot of terminology or having students do a lot. So if you've noticed the whole time we've been talking, I've urged you to put your pens and pencils down simply so that you can experience the poetry without feeling that you have to do something with it. Maybe after a day or 2 or 3 of this, I would come back to my students and say, okay, let's mark up a few things. Let's talk about a few more terms, but this is what the poet technically did. But I still want to come always first with that appreciation and the delight of the words, the delight in our senses, the delight in diction, because poets are working with fewer words in general. So their choices are very intentional. And in that sense, I don't want to kill the words or the meaning by hammering too much analysis with them. So the last page of the handout, the white one, I included some resources and some websites that I found helpful recently. 3 years ago, 4 years ago, when I first taught a poetry workshop, I had a different list. My list is modifying because I keep reading books about poetry. In fact, a couple years ago, 2 years ago, when we last had this conference in person, someone had recommended to me Matthew Zapruder's book, Why Poetry, which has a few good meaty passages in it. But as a teacher, it didn't really help me teach anything in my class. It was just sort of interesting to see what a professor who's also a poet would say about the process of writing poetry. But as far as the practical idea, it didn't really help me with anything I was doing in my classroom with the teenagers I had in front of me, face to face. But these are the books that I would recommend now. And I'm sure 3 years, 5 years from now, the list will change again, maybe. But if the list stays the same, maybe I'm getting closer to ones that will definitely help. So I brought a few with me. The first one came to my attention 2 months ago, and I didn't realize it was written 20 years ago. Produced by Canon Press in Moscow, Idaho. I'd never heard it and never have seen it on their bookshelves whenever they're at conferences at ACCS, and they have all their curriculum and array of books. I have never seen this book there. Suzanne Rhodes is a poet, but this book is a student guide. A student can work through this on their own. And it's one that I can recommend to students as a homeschooler, as a student who's really interested in writing, lots of creative assignments. Would I work through it chapter by chapter with a class? No, but it's a wonderful resource. And it's short, which I love. The other one I continue to recommend is Mary Oliver's short volume, Rules for the Dance. So when we're teaching rhymed poetry, meter, feet, the technical things, she has great examples, short little illustrations that you can easily reproduce. And again, it's almost like that dictionary where I can just pull out what I want. She explains things as a poet really well. She's not ever obtuse, I don't think. Lots of beautiful selections in here to pull from. A lot faster than Googling. In fact, if you have poets who write books about writing poetry or understanding poetry, generally we like to listen to those. We understand that there's a certain level of credibility that we might not have, not being poets, unless you are. The third one, I think 8th Day Books here has it. Laura Bergquist's book, The Harp and the Laurel Wreath. She wrote it for her group of Catholic schools in California a couple decades ago. It is a wonderful, huge book, which I lent a copy to someone a few years ago, and I don't know who it was. It didn't come back to me, but it's a great book. I just don't have it with me. It is for all ages. And she even gives questions at the end of every little poem to show you what they would ask, whether you're a 5-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 15-year-old. And books, poems to memorize, which ones work well, which ones are great for group memory. When you have a long narrative poem and each student in class can memorize one stanza and then recite together after you've worked a few weeks, a beautiful and simple thing that really just causes the whole class to think about the words that they say. It sounds like a simple exercise, but the fruit of it is incredible. I highly recommend it. And there are a few others that I've listed there. But before we go, helpful websites. If I could only mention one website to you, it would be Ambleside Online, which I started using them maybe 2 years ago because they put all the material out there for free. So that is Charlotte Mason Schools. And the Charlotte Mason Schools in the US have a program called Ambleside Online. If you are homeschooling as a parent for age 3 through 18, all of the material is there. It's all linked. They have, by grade, poems that are taught 1 poem a day for every grade, for every month of the year. It's all linked and all listed out, and it is a phenomenal resource. They did all the work, and it's just there at no cost to us. It's a fascinating source, really helpful. Discovery Poetry, you don't run into it very often, but they organize their poems for students by either subject or if you want to do group work, they also have a section for that with the long narratives that I just mentioned. And also for all the books of poetry from the turn of the century and before that are now out of print, and you really can't find the books, particularly William Nesbit, who has his alphabetical history stories that are all poems. The alphabet of history is really fun to read. Easy to memorize for younger students. Everyone memorizes a different one. Lots of things like that at the Internet Archive for those things that you can't find in the library because even the books are too old to still be in the library. So those are my recommendations. We have about 1 minute left. Does anyone have a source that you like, that you found, a poetry collection maybe that you found yourself coming back to, using in class from time to time, you could recommend to share with us?
There's a series of books called A Poem a Day.
Mm-hmm.
So they have 365 poems in a volume,
Okay.
and they just span all different types, styles,
Okay.
genres, ages.
A
They're
poem a
really
day.
fun, yeah.
Okay. Excellent. One of those poetry websites, I'm trying to think, poets.org or one of the others, years ago I had all my seniors sign up for the Poem a Day little text that gets sent to you, little email things. But they were all modern and a lot of them were really just unpleasant. And most of my students unsubscribed within like 3 months. And I'm like, I had to apologize. I thought it would be a great idea. And obviously, not having done it yet, I was like, oh, I should have tried that first before I recommended that. I thought it was a phenomenal idea. Just have a poem texted to you every day. How great is that? It just depends on the quality of the poetry that we're reading. Yes. Most students don't want to be depressed after reading a poem that you get on your phone. You'd rather enjoy something, delight in something. All right, any other recommendations, things you've come across? I think it's this afternoon, Dr. Albert Chang from the University of Arkansas is speaking how poems might help you do science a little bit better and his experiment. And I've heard bits of that, and I can't wait to hear what he has to say because poetry belongs in every subject, I think is part of the premise. So whatever we're doing, more poetry is always a good thing, and it sounds like it might actually benefit your IQ. All right, we're at 12:25. Thank you so much for your attention. Let me know. You can always email me through my website. It's christinenorvell.com. Or just connect somehow through the School of the Ozarks, and we'll connect. Especially email me ideas. If you have ideas and you come across things that work really well in your class, please share what you have so I don't have to steal it later. All right. Thank you.